Hey all, here are OS Reviews. You're watching our throwback look at the Nikon Couplex S800C. This was a point-and-shoot digital camera that came out in 2012, notable for being the first camera that came powered with Android OS. This has since been a trend that's disappeared from mainstream view just because it's a little redundant, considering smartphones have been getting more and more powerful. They can already run all the apps we would call people using our phones, as well as probably game on our phones instead of gaming on a camera. And if you wanted to share your files from your camera, let's say over the cloud, you could simply purchase a Wi-Fi SD card and add the same functionality. Regardless, it was a very interesting piece of technology that we'll be revisiting in this video. So time-wise, this came out a little bit earlier than the popular Samsung Galaxy camera. Samsung also did a slightly better job in terms of marketing this thing. Regardless, they haven't come out with, let's say, a third generation of their Galaxy camera, so again, this is a trend that is no longer going strong. Otherwise, this has pretty much the same lens as far as the hardware is concerned as the Samsung Galaxy S4 Zoom, which, if you guys remember, was an interesting hybrid smartphone from Samsung that was an off-branch variant of the Galaxy S4 that also came with a zoom lens on board. In fact, it has the same sensor size at 1/2.3 inches, and it also has a 16 megapixel sensor and 10 times optical zoom, just like this Nikon Couplex. So image quality is very similar to that one. You can see it's considerably slimmer than the actual Samsung Galaxy camera, just because the Galaxy camera has a larger zoom lens. In addition, it has a larger display on the back, so this thing is at least more comparable in size to just your typical point-and-shoot camera, still easy enough to tuck away into a pocket or into a backpack for easy transportation, as we can see here in this very quick size comparison with the Sony CyberShot camera on the left. Otherwise, the camera's body is made basically out of a polycarbonate plastic, so not quite as high-end as on Samsung's Galaxy Cam, which is made out of aluminum, but still feels well-built enough. And on the side here, we have rubber flaps that covers up a micro HDMI port, and on the top, you'll find access to the zoom, the two-stage camera shutter key, a power on-off switch, along with some stickers and brandings for the Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth, which are all built on board. Here's the xenon and LED flash. This thing does record video up to 1080p full HD resolution, and there's the speaker on the very bottom here. This is the battery compartment along with the SD expansion card slot, and it takes cards up to 64 gigabytes. The one thing I'm pleasantly surprised about, even going back to this camera, is really how quickly it launches. So I just opened up the battery door, basically just popped in the camera battery a few moments ago, but you can see how the entire thing can power on without too much lag or delay, and that's because it's able to launch into this quick interface without having to go into the full Android OS immediately. And as a result, you're not having to wait, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes to turn this thing on before you're able to take images, which was actually my biggest concern at the time, that because it is running on Android, it would be a lot slower to turn on when you really need it. Of course, the zoom lens is one of the biggest reasons why you would want to consider this or any other point and shoot over a smartphone camera, just because most smartphone cameras can only use digital zoom, which reduces the resolution and loses out on a lot of detail. So if you're capturing, let's say, moments in a stadium for sports, or you're trying to capture faraway shots, then really having this optical zoom lens is still a huge plus, but again, that comes at the slight detriment of having a slightly larger and thicker body than what we like to see on a standard smartphone these days. But it works very well. You can see it's quite smooth in terms of motion. The screen on the back measures 3.5 inches diagonally, which was the same size as the original iPhone and the iPhone 4, 4S. It's also a OLED panel, so it offers very rich colors and contrast. We can take a look at the battery percentage remaining. OIS is turned on automatically, the resolution, as well as change the exposure compensation, as well as change the color temperature of your shots by sliding this little bar. And I can tap on this to change the shooting modes. I can select a auto or intelligent shooting mode. I can also tag and create special effects or begin recording video. If I want to tap on scene, for instance, it gives me quite a few different options to play around with, and of course you would expect them to work slightly better than on a smartphone, since again Nikon is a professional manufacturer of just digital cameras. If I wanted to take a look at some of the images I've shot, I can just tap on this button on the side here and it will load it up. So you can see here it's very modified. It doesn't just take you into the Android gallery like on a smartphone, and it's basically running on a modified, a more light light version of the operating system without booting into the full Android OS experience, just to conserve on battery when you only need to take images without accessing more of the specific Android apps. Though it's not necessarily better than what you'll find from just a regular Nikon camera that might be cheaper just because it doesn't have Android OS built in. In fact, that was a critique that many reviewers had at the time. It was that you could find a cheaper camera with very similar sensor quality and image quality, but if you didn't want the Android features built in, you could, again, have a very similar experience. Overall, though, image quality, of course, will be better than you'll find on a smartphone, especially in low light situations with that powerful xenon flash. And with 16 megapixels, you have plenty of details that you can zoom around with and crop around with. You can also start editing the image directly over here. I also have the ability to delete or share it immediately to friends and family using Wi-Fi or social media if I wanted to. And after tapping on that, you can see that we are greeted into the Android OS experience, and the camera lens has zoomed in automatically here. If I tap on back, that's going to take me back into my image gallery where I can continue taking a look at some of these shots. Because it is running on Android, it does have an accelerometer, as you can see here. Obviously, this is not a powerhouse in terms of performance. In fact, it probably only has a single core 1 gigahertz processor and perhaps 512 megabytes of RAM or something close to that. So this is by no means going to be, as fast as the latest flagships that we have today, but most of these regular tasks are still pretty quick to respond. The resolution of the display is 800 by 480, so it's not HD quality, but it still is pretty close. And you can even zoom around using the traditional shutter key on the top here, which is pretty convenient. And here are some other landscape shots. You can see that especially in outdoor environments with good lighting, as usual, you have plenty of details. Colors are vibrant, beautiful, and if you share these to social media, it will be a little bit of an overkill just because of really how good they are. They're not going to be quite DSLR grade as far as the quality is concerned, because at the end of the day, this is essentially a point and shoot with some smart features. But overall, it still is quite impressive, and you can zoom in, you can crop around, and the images turn out to be fairly good, as you can see here. One thing that you won't find on here, however, is the presence of additional, advanced software such as HDR. So when it comes to pulling in details from the shadows or getting the exposure perfectly right when it comes to difficult lighting environments, it will still struggle a little bit more. Certainly better than smartphones of the same era coming in from 2012, 2013, but nonetheless, it's maybe not quite as great as, let's say, a flagship level camera on a phone today, like the Galaxy S9 or the iPhone X, for instance. As you can see here, the sky does seem a little bit oversaturated from the overall image. Alright, so if we tap on home now, it's going to just launch into the regular Android experience, and the transition is actually pretty seamless. As you can see here, it's quite quick to launch into it, but the only downside is it's running on Android 2.3 Gingerbread. That's a very outdated version of Android by 2018 standards, and everything still works, but as you can see, it's a very primitive early build, and we don't have many of the modern touches that we've come to like and expect. Still, the screen is responsive and offers great viewing angles. Surprisingly, at 3.5 inches, it also didn't feel too small or uncomfortable to use. Most of the navigation felt still pretty smooth, and typing, especially in this horizontal view, since you're not going to be tilting it like this for the most part, still felt fairly comfortable and easy to access. We can use the drag down notification drawer, which still performs as expected. As far as built-in apps are concerned, we do have a fairly stock experience going on. You have a handful of standard Google apps, including YouTube, as well as Gmail, access to the standard gallery and maps. There again is GPS built on here, so you can use navigation services for free turn-by-turn directions, although it's a little bit strange to use that on a camera, but it's quite useful for geotagging your shots. We also have access to a few services which have been built by Nikon, including Upload and Play, which allows you to respectively upload your content onto social media, as well as Play is just the modified gallery that we showed you guys earlier. There's also a quick launch key to access the camera just by tapping that button over here instead of having a phone dialer pad, for instance. So that's the built-in speakers, definitely not as strong as what we'd find on a smartphone, especially since it's mono. It's a little bit easy to cover up, and it's kind of quiet. That was about 90% volume, and it didn't get very loud. The biggest downside to this particular design compared to the Samsung Galaxy camera is there's no dedicated volume rocker. And as a result, if you want to change the volume, especially if you're already in an app, you have to go back home, and then you have to open up settings, and then tap on sound in order to change those profiles. The lack of, again, additional keys on the sides makes this a little bit inconvenient. So let's bring up the keyboard. You can also search by voice because yes, there is a microphone on here if you want to record sound in your files for video. And we can also try loading up the New York Times just to see how quickly it will render. You can see a lot of these security certificates are out of date, but you can easily, of course, update some of these apps from the Play Store if you wanted to get a more up-to-date experience. This is still the stock version that we have right out of the box. And although it isn't lightning fast, again, it does work. New York Times is a very complex page, a lot of ads, text, as well as videos and scrolling elements. Although this is the mobile version of the site, it really isn't a bad experience. So if you are browsing the web, you can definitely check some news as well as some updates for sports, things like that, without having too many issues, as you can see here. Speaking of battery life, it's definitely the weakest point of the Cuplex S800C, since it's basically using the same capacity battery as on a standard Nikon camera without all of these smart features like Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth. And as a result, especially with Android OS, it drains very quickly, as you can expect from a 2012 device. Well, luckily, it is pretty easy to swap these batteries out since, again, it's basically just a camera design, but still, it's not going to be quite as strong as on a regular camera. And that was one of the other critiques of Android-powered cameras in general, whether it's the Nikon or the Samsung Galaxy Cam. It's, again, battery life that isn't going to be quite as good as the competition. So that's the Nikon Cuplex S800C Revisited, a mostly forgotten piece of technology that I wanted to take a look back at just because I think that it was overshadowed largely by Samsung's Galaxy camera, but in many ways this was a precursor. It came out slightly earlier, has a slightly more compact form factor, and also runs on Android. We can definitely see how in the early days of Android there was a lot of experimentation done by manufacturers to this free open source platform as far as creating unique smart devices that challenge the notion of what Android was designed for and what it could do in the future. So thanks for watching this video here at OS Reviews. That's been our look back at the Nikon Cuplex S800C, the first Android-powered digital camera.